Hello everyone, it's 𝐒𝐻𝐽𝐻𝐽, and in this video it's my first listen to the new album from Boris called 𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐿. I've been a fan of Japanese experimentalists Boris for many years now. Their monolithic 2003 album Boris at Last 𝐸edbacker is one of my favourite albums of all time. They are masters of drone and doom metal, but they've also experimented over the years with dream pop, shoegaze, and even noise. This latest album was announced as a companion piece to their last album, No, morphing them together into a double album called Now. No was more of a punk rock sounding album from Boris, but the singles they've been putting out for 𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐿 were quite a bit more experimental. So I was wondering how it might all come together and how it would link into the sound of No. The rest of this video will be highlights from my live stream over on Twitch, where I listened to the album for the first time in full, and you can follow me over there if you'd like to join us for more listening parties. So do me a favor and click the like button on this video, and let's get into the album. Track 1 on the album is called I Want to Go to the Side Where You Can Touch. Yeah, that cover art kind of creeps me out a bit. Loving this atmosphere so far. That tasty Boris guitar feedback. Didn't expect that. Yeah, that was a very promising start, I thought. But I have to say, I thought the noise was going to build up into track 2. Like either switch into something else in track 2 or build to some kind of climax in track 2. But instead it kind of resolved itself and went into that bizarre, tiny little, quiet little jam at the end there. Yeah, pretty interesting. I really enjoyed that whole thing though. The whole atmosphere was very compelling. Really nice textures. Loved the guitar feedback threatening to burst out at any moment. Some stabs of it coming through towards the end. Overall, that kind of feeling of an intro to a post-rock epic, something that Boris has done before. But yeah, I have to say I'm quite surprised by how it didn't build to something. I mean, it built and built and built, and then it destroyed itself, which is quite interesting. Towards the end of that track, I was starting to expect that it was going to build into the next track and maybe the album was going to feel like some sort of suite. Just because I was looking at the fact that this is a 5-minute track. I mean, this feels like it's building to something 4 times as long. But nope, that was it. So once again, we're left wondering what on earth's going to come next, because it could really be anything. Track 2 is called 𝐼𝐶ELINA. So many interesting things going on. I don't know what to concentrate on. I love that feeling. Very atypical bass line. Well, I really enjoyed the creativity in that song. It had, you know, quite a few textural ideas and sounds that are quite unlike anything I've really heard. I really enjoyed the way that so many of the sounds had very little release. So they would begin and just cut off. And it wasn't just one thing doing that. It was the bass, you know, certain drum samples, and it made a really cool effect. I was really into that. I think the only criticism I would have of that song is it felt like it had a lot of potential, but they didn't really develop it. Like, I feel like it could have gone somewhere a bit more. Still really creative, really interesting. So yeah, I liked the song, but I would have liked it to build somewhere, I suppose. Next song, track 3, was one of the singles. It's called Drowning by Numbers. Love the bass line in this one too. Very alien sounds. So when we first heard that song as a single, I was very surprised by it because, as I mentioned, Boris have framed this new album as being a companion to their previous album, No. This album being called 𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐿, put them together and they're Now. So that being said, I was expecting this album to follow in the style of No in some way, which was a more upbeat punk rock kind of album. So when we heard that single, Drowning by Numbers, it was a bit like, well, this is nothing like No, so what's going on? How is this going to work? It seems to make a bit more sense now because each song has been very experimental and more focused on texture and sound manipulation than it is on songwriting. I did think that Drowning by Numbers is, again, very texturally interesting. Love the unusual bass line. But again, it feels a little bit inconsequential. It creates this really interesting atmosphere. There's lots of interesting sounds to latch onto and get immersed in. But as the minutes go by in the song, you start to think, so this is all it's going to be. There's not going to be any changes. And that's a little bit of a disappointment. I actually feel that a little bit more strongly now than I did hearing it as a single. Very intriguing, but ultimately a little bit unsatisfying. So hopefully there'll be something a bit more fulfilling later in the album or at some point in the album. Let's find out. Track 4 is called Invitation. Like those slightly detuning sounds. Once again, another track that sets up a really interesting atmosphere and pretty much sticks around in it. That being said, that song was a bit shorter than the previous songs, so it felt less like it was outstaying its welcome to me. Because what actually did happen was, again, pretty intriguing, although maybe a little bit less interesting than some of the previous tracks. I liked some of the vocal ideas that were happening right towards the end there, but maybe they didn't get expanded upon enough. Let's get straight into track 5. It's called The Fallen. Some real drums. Bit more signature Boris, this one then. Very nice. I have to say, when the song started, I thought, great, there's that signature sound. Sounds fat, sounds fantastic. But then I did start to wonder, is this just going to be like a token throwback? You know, like it's not as creative or interesting as the earlier tracks, it seemed. But what that song ended up really having on its side was it had development, which the earlier tracks didn't have. So I was really into it for that. I loved the way it had the more open sections, then the more groovy riffing sections, then back to the more open section at the end, and this time introducing extra sound effects, panning effects. Really cool. That being said, it is still a bit strange that we had this kind of consistent atmosphere and approach for most of the album up to this point, and now suddenly, bam, we're doing old school Boris. It feels like it doesn't entirely work as an album, but you know, we're halfway through the album, so it'll be interesting to see what they do in the second half from here. Track 6 is called Beyond Good and Evil. Back to the more subdued stuff. Okay, this is cool. Nice bit of atonality there. So I did enjoy the progression of that song, but I feel like maybe only because I feel so much like I needed progression after some of the earlier tracks in the album. As a song, I didn't find Beyond Good and Evil to be particularly compelling. It was fine. It was like a pretty kind of dream pop thing, but not very moving, not very exciting. Let's go into track 7. It's called Old Projector. Like this texture already. Love the low end on the drum there. What? That's really how it ends? It's a bit disappointing. Yeah, it's another one of these tracks that sets up some really great ideas, some great textures, but ultimately is just kind of weirdly unsatisfying. Like, I feel like that song, I remember saying about the first track on this album that it could have been 4 times as long, and I feel like that about that song as well. Yeah, I really loved some of the sounds in that, the droning guitars, really getting into the sound, really getting swept away, and then there were a couple of moments of big changes where it felt like it was taking us on a journey, and then it felt like, oh no, it's coming to an end. And not only was it coming to an end, it was just cut off. It's quite bizarre. I feel like if that was actually expanded on and made into a full-length piece, it could be fantastic. But as it is, it's more like a teaser. In terms of the sound, what I was most reminded of was Earth. You know, really early Earth, before Earth 2, when they had drums and everything. But also their later stuff, because they had some of those kind of Western sounding, only slightly distorted electric guitars that, you know, sounds really cool. But yeah, they had that, and then they had the more heavy drones, and then like it was building into a gigantic riff towards the end. So I enjoyed all the parts, I enjoyed the progression, but then they just ended it. We got the last kind of decently length song next, and actually it's the longest song on the album, so maybe we're going to get something a bit more complete feeling this time. It's track 8 and it's called You Will Know, a Hi-Yo version. It's 9 minutes long, so let's see. Some really interesting bass sounds again. Love that bass. Yeah, I don't know, guys. There were a lot of sounds in that track that I liked a lot, and I did appreciate the fact that they allowed the song to breathe so that you could get immersed into those sounds. I was into it a lot of the time for that. But the songwriting is basically absent for me. I was really enjoying the bass lines in that, just for how interesting the bass sounded. You know, it reminds me of the weird album cover art. Some great progressions, but melodically, there's just nothing there. Like, the vocals were especially kind of off-putting for me, actually. I didn't like the vocals because I just felt they were just meandering around these notes and not pinning anything. And I don't know, it just felt very underdeveloped to me, and like they just stretched it out so you could enjoy the textures. And I did enjoy the textures, but not a satisfying track for me in the end, because I just can't grab hold of anything. Sounds good, but not a great track for me, unfortunately. And that just leaves us with the last track, which is a very short one. Track 9 is called 𝐒𝐻𝐳. I was wondering if it was going to be a magic window for a moment then. This is odd, isn't it? Yeah, there was some jamming in that song, but it was extremely quiet, and I'm not exactly sure why. I don't know if it's because they recorded it from really far away or they just turned it down a lot. Not a very exciting outro to the album. Not very intriguing either. I'm quite disappointed with the album, actually, guys. I don't know what to say. I wasn't sure what to expect from the album because the singles were so different, but I guess I was expecting something experimental and interesting, and at some points we got that. But for the most part, it just felt so unworked. Not really any development to any of the ideas, which is a real shame, because some of the ideas here were really interesting. Some of the sound manipulation, some of the guitar sounds and bass sounds were quite different and really interesting, but then it would seem like that was all they had. You know, they just had this interesting idea or this interesting sound, and they would play it for 4 minutes, and that's what you got. Just looking back over it, I feel there's so much potential here in this album, so many cool sounds and ideas, and it just wasn't capitalized on, and it feels like a real shame. And it's not like Boris needs to have incredible melodies or anything like that, but you at least need to have interesting progressions. You at least want to feel that the idea they're setting up is going to go somewhere, or at least resolve in some kind of interesting way, and it just didn't happen almost at all. Doesn't really feel like a proper album. It feels like a set of ideas. It feels almost like a demo album. I kind of enjoyed listening to it just to hear what they were going to do next, what interesting sound they might throw at us next, but on the whole, just kind of unsatisfying. So leave a comment down below to let me know what you thought of this album, and if you missed the live stream and want to see the full unedited recording, you can find it over on my Patreon. Whichever tier you support me at, you get access to the full archive of unedited reactions, and you'll be helping me to be able to continue making these videos and keep my channels going, so I'll really appreciate it. And thank you very much for watching. Until next time, take it easy.